So welcome everyone. Welcome to our third session in the Theory Method Research Symposium series. My name is Anna Smith, and I'm so happy to have Dr. Fong with us tonight. We have one more session after this with Dr. Keisha Green, and so you can still feel free to register for that session coming up. We're going to have a few introductory remarks, sharing who we are before we turn our time over. But we do have the chat open. And, in a webinar kind of setting, it can be hard to feel like we can make connections. So that chat's there. We'll be monitoring it throughout the evening, but feel free to tell us who you are, where you're joining from. And we're happy that you're joining with us tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to, I think it's Robbie.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Smith. The Theory Method Research Symposium series is hosted by the Education Now Lab at Illinois State University in the School of Teaching and Learning and College of Education. We are a community-engaged research practice lab that engage in and produce a range public, academic, and new media scholarship with and alongside community members as we work toward more just educational futures. The lab has been in a slow launch since 2020. It currently hosts 5 doctoral students and their research partners pursuing critical research at the intersection of education, literacies, technologies, and participatory approaches. We are hosting this series as the part of a course called Conceptual Understanding in Education Research with Dr. Smith. We will be sharing our takeaways through social media throughout this semester at EduNowLab on both Twitter and Instagram. You can use the hashtag Theory Method and tag at EduNowLab if you are sharing your thoughts tonight, and follow us there for more this series.
We are working to make meaningful in our course that Illinois State University was built on the land and waters of multiple indigenous nations who were forcibly removed, including the Illini, Peoria, and Miami, and later due to colonial encroachment and displacement to the Fox, Potawatomi, Sauk, Shawnee, Winnebago, Iowa, Mascouten, Piankashaw, Hui, and Kickapoo nations. We also honor the indigenous people who we may have excluded due to historical erasure and inaccuracy.
It is a great pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Carlton Fong. Dr. Fong is an assistant professor in the graduate program in developmental education within the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at Texas State University. His research focuses on the motivational, psychological, and instructional factors that influence success, achievement, and persistence in post-secondary education using research synthesis and meta-analytic techniques. He is the 2022 recipient of the Michael Pyrite Collaboration Award from the American Educational Research Association, and in 2021 was named an Association for Psychological Science Rising Star. Tonight, Dr. Fong will be discussing critical race theory in quantitative research. Please help me welcome Dr. Carlton Fong.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to try to share my presentation, and apologies if it doesn't quite work the first time, but let's see how it goes here.
Thank you for giving us a shot. We had some technical difficulties in getting Dr. Fong in, so I think it should work, hopefully.
Okay, let me try another way. Hold on. Thanks for your patience. Okay. I want to do the fancy view, but it's not working, so let me try this. Okay. Okay, how about now? Is it looking good? Okay, wow. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much for joining. And I'm really looking forward to this. Every time I see that beautiful poster, I get very overwhelmed because I'm like, these are such amazing scholars on this poster, not me, the other people. And I'm just like, what am I doing here? So I'm just like super overwhelmed to be a part of this, and just really grateful for the opportunity. I am self-disclosure time, transparency and honesty. And here we go. I did not start academia thinking this way. I came from a wonderful educational psychology program, but did not really think critically about methodology, really critically about epistemology and philosophical frameworks. It was really kind of quantitative methods is what it is, and this is how you use it, and go forward. And I sheepishly confess that it was after I got my doctorate when when people were like, oh, what's your epistemological background? And I'm like, what? It like literally, like these were honest answers I've had. So it's really been a journey for me. I've really come at it just really trying just to be humble in kind of this pursuit of knowledge and educational research, and just kind of taking all the bits that I've received. And so I do want to recognize that this work, and I've cited them, and I have a little reference document at the end as well, building off of the work of so many other people who have thought about QuantCrit and just critical approaches to research. So I just want to make sure all the shout outs are given, and I'm going to be really relying heavily on all of their amazing insights. So I want to kind of problematize quantitative work and think why a QuantCrit approach is needed. And then I want to move into thinking kind of more deeply about what is QuantCrit and what are some of the guiding principles behind QuantCrit. And then if time allows, just to give some examples of the ways I've tried to do some of this work in some recent studies. So, like I said, my background is in educational psychology, and I would say maybe over the last decade or so, the field of educational psychology has been reflecting and thinking deeply about how race is examined and how racial issues are treated in educational psychology scholarship. DeQueer, Gunby, and Schutz in 2014 published really this kind of groundbreaking paper where they reviewed the top, 5 or 6 ed psych journals in the field and coded whether race was a focus on, the hundreds and hundreds of studies published in these journals. And startingly, there was only 1.3% of articles that focused on race. And I think that was a big wake-up call for a lot of educational psychologists. I was the former chair of the Motivation and Education SIG of AERA, and so I have some insider information about kind of what our submissions look like. And about 80% of submissions, and I honestly think that number has gone down. And so we're getting a little bit more open to mixed methods and qualitative research, but just kind of the sheer dominance of quantitative research, especially in educational psychology, I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that this is how the field has historically been. And then I heard this in a webinar a few months ago, and I thought this really stood out to me as well, that among AERA minority dissertation fellows, so these are graduate students who apply for this really competitive but really generous year-long fellowship, only 15% of these applicants, graduate students of color, proposed quantitative methods. And so these 3 kind of factoids, right, take it all kind of as a constellation here, like what's going on, especially in kind of the field I'm coming from, and also educational research kind of more broadly. How are quantitative methods being used? How are they represented, and who's using them, right? And so just wanted to kind of put those little kind of 3 headlines out there. So let's think about about how quantitative methods, or kind of QM for short, how have they approached issues of race and racism kind of historically. And so some of the things that kind of jump out to me, some of the perennial issues in quantitative methods in relation to issues of race and racism are maybe things like statistical comparisons and group differences, right? Let's compare the white students and the Asian students. Let's compare the Black students and the Latin students, right? We want to find differences, right? Maybe this has been some of the research you've seen. Maybe it's some of the research you've done, right? And I think reflecting on this type of research, we have to actually be kind of critical and kind of careful about how these comparisons are done. I think historically, a lot of this work can lead to some of the deficit thinking that's prevalent kind of in our educational sector towards students of color. And so from a critical perspective, let's kind of say, we need to maybe think critically about how we're comparing different student groups along racial lines. What about things like a reference group, right? Maybe you're conducting some sort of statistical model, and one group is considered the reference group, right? One group is considered everything else compared to that. And so what is that comparator, right? What's the norm? What's deemed normal, right? And so once again, these questions begin to emerge when a critical lens is kind of being applied to some of these issues. And then nothing new, measurement and instrument selection. This can be rather fraught with issues, right? Who are these surveys and instruments normed with, right? Who were kept in mind when these items were developed, when these items were being validated? What perspectives were being considered, right? And so if we look historically at a lot of quantitative research, and once again, I'm coming mostly from educational psychology, a lot of this has really made whiteness into the norm, right? We're going to compare this student group of color against this group of white students that we have in our data, or the white students are going to serve as the reference group, or my measure was normed with a predominantly white sample, right? And so when we're critically examining these issues, I think we start to see, is there another way forward, right? Is there another way to think critically about these issues? And I really love the theme of this symposium, this series, right? Theory to methods. And what QuantCrit is really doing is taking critical race theory and translating that into quantitative methods. And that's what we're hopefully going to be getting a taste of today. So for a really quick, brief primer on critical race theory, it's dealing with the centrality of race, racism, and white supremacy, that race, racism, and its intersections, these are an endemic part of society. And CRT challenges the dominant frameworks and ideologies that are often white-centered or perhaps white supremacist in origin. And at the core of critical race theory is social justice and storytelling, and critical race research is really about empowering oppressed groups and eliminating racism and poverty. Storytelling is really important. It's the experiential knowledge of people of color. That's a legitimate way of understanding the world, and storytelling is a legitimate way of doing so. And CRT, it's interdisciplinary, it's transdisciplinary, and so because of that, it's drawing from a lot of different areas of scholarship, and it originated from legal studies. So how does this translate to quantitative methods? And some of the points I was hoping we could consider or perhaps reconsider is the notion that quantitative methods are bias-free that they are coming from a quote unquote objectivism type framework, right? Kind of problematizing that, kind of interrogating that a little bit. Quantitative methods for counterstory. Data are not objective, right? There is a story, there is a narrative, and can that data be employed for counterstory? And then I think also critically examining QM's historical roots as well, right? Always having this socio-historic approach to inform kind of the contemporary understandings of what we're doing. Okay, so QuantCrit principles. Once again, a lot of scholars have done so much work in this area. So wanting to really highlight a lot of their insights. Gilborn, Wendy Castillo, and many, many others, once again, have a reference sheet at the end. So y'all can take a look there. But the how critical race theory has been translated into quantitative methods. This has really been formalized by these QuantCrit principles. And so we'll go through each one, but the 5 are the centrality of racism, that numbers are not neutral, that categories are neither natural nor given, the importance of voice and insight, that data cannot speak for itself, and then 5, playing a role in struggles for social justice. And so we'll take one each in turn. So the first is the centrality of racism. Racism is complex. It is subtle. It permeates institutions, the systems we're in, the structures that we're a part of. It consciously or to consciously seek out and understand and expose racism, and quantitative methods can potentially remake or legitimize racial injustices. And so how we employ quantitative methods, it really has a role in how racism is either kind of reified or dismantled. And so how does this play out in a lot of QuantCrit work? I think one thing you'll see is positionality statements. And so statements that are typically more found in qualitative work. It almost might seem shocking to find it in a quantitative study because, once again, historically, quantitative methods has been assumed to have this objectivist kind of lens to it. And so why would researchers need to disclose their biases, their identities, their experiences that could shape their decisions in research making? But a QuantCrit researcher would totally provide their positionality because because this work, when we're trying to dismantle racism, right, it requires the active reflection of the researchers, of the quantitative researchers. They allow the researchers to examine and share where there have been silences and absences of experience, because these things are often masked, right? Masked under the guise of objectivism. And so we're really trying to break free from that. And so a positionality statement, and not just, a token paragraph that summarizes some of your background or your identities, but really a joint active reflection, especially with various collaborators, to really kind of think about these issues together. I think also thinking about the centrality of racism is also thinking about how so much of education has been framed in deficit ways. And so what are the questions we're asking? What are the items that we're using? What are the measures that are being utilized in these studies? Are they framed in a deficit way, right? Are they assuming deficit mentalities about the agents and about the students we're examining in our studies? And so really understanding that, really trying to question that, and interrogate that and rather infuse kind of asset-based perspectives, right? This can kind of combat some of the deficit framing that's, I think, so prevalent. The second principle is that numbers are not neutral. So the tools, the models, the techniques we use, are they accounting for racism as a central factor in daily life, right? Or is there this, once again, assumed objective support that we think we can lean on when it comes to quantitative work, right? So numbers are not neutral. This translates into choosing our denominator carefully, right? Choosing, right, what's being looked at, who's being included in our sample. And when thinking about these statistical contrasts and these figures we want to provide, right? Who's included, right? Who was excluded? And these questions and the way they're answered are going to really lead to different results with, I think, important policy implications as well. Also with model selection, I use a lot of secondary data, and model selection is really crucial because the items you choose, the variables you include into, let's say, a multiple regression model, right? Which variables are you picking? Which variables are you opting not to include, right? Are intersectional identities captured in the variables you're using? These are some of the questions to consider as we think about this principle that numbers are not neutral, right? The values, the items, the variables, the analyses, right? All of these different steps, they're going to include or exclude certain identities. Third, categories are neither natural nor given. This is premised on that race is a social construct, right? It's not a cultural marker. And every time we think about race, you could substitute race with racism, right? How is racism implicated rather than highlighting some sort of deficit when it comes to people of color? And so we need to think through critically these issues, thinking about how many racial groups to include in your sample, right? Are there too many? Are there too few? I don't think there's really an objective set of, these are the groups you must include in every study. No, this involves a real critical examination. It requires input, right, from community members, from stakeholders, and it's really something to wrestle with, right? What are the categories? What should they be for this study? And when is it important to disaggregate? When is it possible to meaningfully disaggregate so inequities are unmasked? And when should racial groups not be treated, right, as a monolith, right? I think these are all the questions that come up as we think about that third principle: categories are neither neutral nor given. And then fourth, voice and insight. Data cannot speak for itself. Data, too, are socially constructed. Research is shaped by the researchers. Research is shaped by the funders of the research we do. And there are so many decision points about what to count, how to count, what data to include, what data to exclude. And so we know that there's so much that goes into it. And to assume that data just speaks for itself, I think, is a big misstep. And so part of QuantCrit is that findings are not in a vacuum, right? So we need to take seriously how research is conducted within the context, right? When it's being done on certain people groups, right? How's it going to make sense for them, right? The people that are implicated in the research we're doing. And so I think this really boils down to what are the perspectives and understandings that are informing the research, right? How are they informing how the data are being collected, what type of data are being collected, and ultimately how they're being interpreted. And then fifth, QuantCrit has a orientation towards social justice and equity. It's to utilize numbers, thinking about how historically a lot of statistical research has been used, I think, for rather nefarious purposes, right? We think about eugenics and some of the work that's been done, earlier last century that where quantitative methods have been really abused. Knowing that it's been historically used that way, what are the contemporary ways we can utilize statistical analyses and quantitative methods to move towards more equitable societies? This requires interrupting the status quo, the current thinking and practices that we engage in. And so it translates to how are we interpreting our findings towards social justice? Are we exposing racism operating often under the radar? What are the metrics that we're using? What are the outcomes? What are the dependent variables? Are they the ones that we often turn to that are deemed appropriate and deemed important? Or are these the metrics that are valued by people and communities of color? And so a quick primer through some of these principles and just some of the questions that I think quantitative critical scholars are grappling with as they think about QuantCrit in their work. Jenna Sablon, she has a wonderful paper in AERJ 2019, and this quote is from her. She says, emphasizing the assets of students of color rather than deficits, and speaks to the overarching structure of racism and racial inequity in framing, interpretation, and approach. And I really love this quote. I think this is one of those quotes that I return to as I think about what type of research I want to be doing and the day-to-day decisions when it comes to some of the work I'm trying to do. Sablon also gives some direction on kind of where QuantCrit is in education, and she gives some direction on where things could potentially go. A lot of this work is descriptive and really valuable descriptive work, right? Looking at aggregating, disaggregating, your sample, thinking about how different trends, different outcomes are for different racial groups, not, once again, treating racial groups as a monolith. And so a lot of this has been really valuable descriptive work. But Sablon also points to, more work needs to be done in the measurement area, in advanced modeling techniques, in causal inference. And so, taking some of these cues has really guided some of the work I've tried to do using QuantCrit, and particularly around measurement and modeling. And so there's a lot here, but this is a study that I conducted with some really fabulous doctoral students at the time. Adam Alejandro in particular identifies as Indigenous, and he and I really worked closely to think about community college students and belongingness. And this study primarily, I think, kind of reflects some of the QuantCrit work, because we really wanted to show that measures are not created equally, and that different students are going to respond to them differently. And so we used a measurement invariance, which essentially tests if different groups of individuals are responding to measures very differently, right? They're interpreting the items differently. And so we looked at some belonging items, belonging factor items in some community college secondary data. And they looked at items around kind of campus relationships, how supportive your friends and family were for your college attendance, and also how much the institution is kind of developing kind of self and community values. And so we used measurement and variance and compared the Indigenous students in our secondary data. And we also compared that with a second group of non-Indigenous students. And this was a propensity score matched sample. So we matched them on a lot of other demographic characteristics. So they were a pretty good kind of comparator group. And unsurprisingly, we found that there was measurement non-invariance, so that Indigenous students were interpreting these items and responding to these items differently than their non-Indigenous counterparts. And so this really gave us a window into how Indigenous students are experiencing belongingness factors differently than other students at their campuses. And so this really showed us that the experiences and perceptions of belongingness, particularly for Indigenous students who I think we know historically have been marginalized in higher education and K-12 education as well, that it's important to focus on how Indigenous students are really experiencing belongingness. And when after identifying kind of these differences, we focused on just the Indigenous student group and took these measures and saw how they predicted outcomes like collegiate achievement and goal attainment as well. And so so these really kind of demonstrated not only the measurement differences, but I think also kind of an asset-based approach, right? There's often this like deficit lens, right, focused on students of color. But when we focus on Indigenous students and say their experiences are unique, and we found that using measurement and variance and their perceptions are unique, and how they perceive things like community and family and their self-systems, those matter, right? Those matter for not only maybe more traditional outcomes like collegiate achievement, but also the diverse goals they also have. Goals like goals to develop themselves personally, right? Goals to serve their community. These outcomes aren't often found, right, in the reports we see in higher ed, but we wanted to focus on a more diverse array of metrics when it comes to what success may look like. It also involves uncovering what those counter stories may be. And to do so, we've also been doing some qualitative work, and that qualitative work has caused us to reflect on how we should do the quantitative work, because the qualitative work, our group has seen that it's provided us what those counter stories may be. And this is work done that we looked at 3 students. We did a collective case study, and this is one of what one of the students in our study shared. Everyone, I think, at least in your Native background, kind of shares that same sense of belonging and understanding of why we're here and why we're doing all this work. I think Native people in general keep their communities in mind when they're making a career decision, or at least involvement. Maybe they don't want to work in a community, but they always want to be a part of it in some way, somehow. So I think part of what our team has done has, like I said, tried to gather those stories and use them to really inform how can we try to model some of this quantitatively in some of the data we had. So one last study, this was recently accepted in the Journal of Diversity in Higher Ed. And this time we focused on tribal community colleges, and we looked at about 1,000 or so Indigenous students at tribal community colleges. And we really wanted to celebrate these minority serving institutions as spaces that were really celebrating and really supporting the cultural development of these students, and to learn, what is going on in these institutions and what can other institutions do to support students of color as well. And so we did a structural equation model, and we used items where students perceived how well their institutions were supporting their cultural development, things like their language development, things like their holistic development of mind, body, spirit, their connections to their communities. And so we really wanted to, once again, see these assets that Indigenous students had and saw the power that they had. And what was really neat was we saw how they perceived institutions supporting these assets as being positively predicting of their experiences of belonging, as well as their perceptions that their institutions were supporting their student success. And those in turn were positively influencing their GPA. And so we see that when institutions are focused on the asset development of the Indigenous students in our sample, it kind of set off this kind of chain of events, right? They're going to feel like they belong. They're going to feel like they're supported. And those in turn are going to support them academically. And it manifests itself quite concretely as well. So those are just some examples of ways in which we've tried to take some of the principles of QuantCrit, try to bring it in to some of the work I've done. Like I said, I've been on this journey for a couple of years now, really trying to grapple with these issues. And so I'm really excited to now have some questions and discussion to try to learn more together. Here are the resources that I promised. And so if you want to go to this website, if we want to throw it on the chat as well, it's just a Google Doc that I've started a couple years ago now. I just kind of throw different pieces that I find that I think are quite relevant. And so there are some articles there, some book chapters, some recent ones, some older ones as well. There's some special issues that are really great. One looking at QuantCrit itself, and then one kind of ed psych special issue in CEP, where some of the work that I was sharing is in. And there's also a really great institute called the ICQCM, Institute in Critical Quantitative Computational and Mixed Methodologies. And so I have the link there as well. So once again, not an exhaustive list, but just some resources I've kind of picked up along the way. So thank you so much.
Amazing. And there's a great thread on Twitter. So Catherine Ye has been doing a really wonderful job of capturing so many of these resources as well. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and switch to, like Dr. Fong said, some Q&A time. We have one of our EduNow Lab participants who's going to raise some questions. So if you have any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll try to help coordinate the discussion now. So I am going to, let's open up the view here. Yeah, so Tiffany, go ahead and start us off with some questions.
Yes. Hi, Dr. Fong. There was a question that was posed in the Q&A at one point, asking if you can talk a little bit about how latent variables themselves are open to misinterpretations and or abuses.
Okay. Thanks for that question. Perhaps I could get a little bit more about your question, but I will say that latent variables, I think traditionally used in a lot of structural equation modeling, used to they can't be directly observed or measured, And so they're often right. Yeah. So so what are some problems with that? I think one potential way, and if I'm understanding the question correctly, could be that it's often like we're kind of getting more and more distant, right, from the data. And so part of me worries sometimes about a lot of this latent variable modeling, where the decision points can multiply and how they're positioned, what paths are drawn, what direction the paths are in, how these variables are constructed. All of these decision points, I think, just need a lot more critical thought. And I think there's some danger there, where researchers and their biases and their whatever background they may have, those can influence, right, how these latent variables are constructed and placed within the models. And so while I think they can definitely be used still, and I definitely think they could be used for critical purposes, I just kind of worry that that they can kind of lead to potential kind of slippery slopes. So
Okay. Another question I have is, do you find that QuantCrit work often, I don't want to say needs, but has qualitative, like it's a more of a mixed methods is more successful with QuantCrit where you need the qualitative methodology along with that? I know you mentioned that you did that in the one of your studies.
yeah, I would agree that that is a great way to approach this work. The special issue I had referenced in the Google Doc, I believe there is an article there that begins to discuss QuantCrit with testimonial methods, which bring in the qualitative and kind of mixed method approaches with QuantCrit. And so, yeah, I would totally recommend that. Once again, I didn't really do that kind of in a single study, but I do think incorporating the qualitative is a really great way, especially when thinking about, what are the counter narratives? If we don't know them, how will we detect them, right, in the data that we may have quantitatively? So,
All right, great. There was thank you so much for that. There was another not so much a question, but where they just wanted to hear more from you. A person mentioned that they also grapple with categories and variance attribution when considering intersectionality. And they would be interested in knowing how you worked through this, or any methodological advice for QuantCrit with intersectional framings.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, once again, categories are really important when it comes to QuantCrit. There has been a lot more work in this area. I'm thinking of another kind of journal college student development paper by Antonio Duran, Duran. He the authors did a really nice intersectional look at belonging in college, and they really looked at a lot of different intersections in that study. It's a lot of interaction results in a model, but it is really neat to see that represented, right? Because we talk about it and then we don't see it in the analyses, and they really put that front and center. But it's challenging, right? If you look at the Castillo and Gilborn paper, they say, when is it meaningful statistically to disaggregate and to think about the sample sizes when it comes to a lot of the intersectional identities. And it's challenging. I'm not going to say, hey, just do this and it's easy. It's going to be challenging, and it's going to take a lot of critical reflection to think about when are these intersections plausible to include in the model. How can it be meaningful? That's why I think it all starts from the beginning, right? It starts from the data collection and thinking about what are the detailed ways and the intentional ways we can collect data so intersections are represented. And so I think that's, not an easy answer, but definitely there are some ways to kind of go about it. There's another working paper that I've seen by Dominique Baker and others who looked at how racial categories have been used in, I think, the main AERA journals, like AERJ, at a researcher. And so that's also been, starting to dig in, like, how are these categories used? Are intersectional identities included? Who are the groups that are being excluded and othered in these top ed journals? And so once again, a critical window into our field, but a lot more work is kind of being done. So,
yeah, good. Okay, thank you. Another question is, as a researcher at a public university in Texas, have you dealt with any pushback on critical race theory / QuantCrit from the institution or otherwise?
Not directly yet. In the hallways, it's been a conversation or two for sure. We've gotten some good support from our dean and our faculty senate and things like that. So we'll see is kind of how to answer that, I guess. Yeah.
To be determined.
To be determined. Yeah.
Okay, another question from the same person is, how do you deal with incomplete categories of information that the universities have, like racial and ethnic categories, which are not disaggregatable? For example, only Asian American rather than further.
Yeah, that's really tricky. And I think that is, like I said, I use a lot of secondary data, and it's like one of the erg moments when you really can't disaggregate categories like that. So I think that's really challenging with secondary data. I think with primary data, that's probably the best way to go if you can try to be really intentional and detailed in your data collection. I haven't tried this yet, but maybe even working with the institutional offices at your institutions and be like the institutional research offices, and begin to start gathering that data, right? Like, why, maybe say, can we expand some of these categories, right? And begin those changes. I think it's going to take those kind of incremental moves, and thinking, once again, what is normal, right? We need to interrogate, right, how surveys have been designed, how these questions and answers have been scripted, right? And so yes, it's really hard with secondary data, and I would say with primary data, being really intentional and getting community stakeholder input when crafting these items. One of my recent graduates, for her dissertation, really came up with a detailed demographic survey for her dissertation, and really wanted to be exhaustive in what students could report and how they identify. And so trying to do that in the primary research, the more type of surveys that are out there that students see, that other researchers see, they're gonna be like, oh wow, I could, think more critically about how I'm asking this. And I think over time we're going to be seeing hopefully more opportunities to disaggregate because the data will be there.
Yeah, hopefully. Okay. Another person brought up that decades ago, Peter McLaren and Patty Lather separately decided to use language of methods originally and not borrow concepts and methods from off the shelf. Can't QuantCrit go in this direction as well?
I'm going to give the academic good question, and I am not quite sure about that. I'm
wondering, and maybe Eric can chime in the chat too. I was thinking this might be also in reference to the idea of there's so much borrowing in quantitative work, right? To establish to use a measure, we want a measure that has been validated, that has been normed, that has been all of those things, but that means we bring along with it whatever deficit racist framings are internal to the measure or to the norming or the sampling that was done with that. So I'm wondering if you're pointing here to, so yes, we use the language of methods. So we talk about norming, or we talk about measures, or we don't necessarily borrow them. I'm wondering if that's,
maybe that.
If that's is it possible in quant not to use established models? Is this where? Let's see if I can chime in and say, are we going the right way in thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I could see that happening. Yeah, I think that'd be really cool. New innovations in methodologies and kind of what we're calling them. I think that would be really interesting. I think there's just so much innovation right now in methodology that kind of how qualitative work has been really taking just pushing the boundaries in what's considered knowledge and valid and trustworthy. And so I just think there's some really cool ways that qualitative work has really been at the forefront of kind of like innovating. I think it'd be neat to see that as well, kind of in the quant space in a more critical way.
Yeah, thank you. And so there was another person who posted and said, I really appreciate your emphasis on including and recognizing diversity and voices of the participants and not just keeping them as numbers. This person comes from a qualitative background, so struggling to connect the affordances from both the methods, qual and quant. Every time I hear about an experiment set up or an intervention, I feel that this is not right. Can you talk to these affordances where you can see such methods as valuable for the participants, even when for them to get a benefit is randomized?
Okay. Experiment set up or intervention. Like this is not right. Okay, connect these points. Okay, so I think there's a lot here. Seems to be the focus seems to be on the intervention side of things. viable for the participants, even when for them to get a benefit is randomized. Yeah, I mean, thinking about intervention work, I guess there is the camp that would say that, randomization and thinking about like who's going to get the treatment, who's going to get the control, and yeah, there are definitely some potentially even ethical issues, let alone critical issues. I know a lot of work that's happening now that's like just kind of delaying interventions, and so you're able to have all students receive whatever training or whatever help that the intervention may provide. And so I think there are some ways to still give benefit. I think at the end of the day, but I think maybe some of the affordances from QuantCrit would be to disaggregate, right, what these intervention effects may look like on for different groups of students, for different racial groups of students. Maybe the intervention may be having an average benefit for those that are receiving it, but could they be having a negative impact on some other groups? There's a new call out for review of research and education called I forget what it's called, but it's like the negative side effects, right? Like the negative consequences of education. And if I can get my act together, we're planning to submit something because like there's so many different interventions and different policies and different things like that. And are we just looking at, the average impact of this one thing, or are we thinking critically about, okay, who are the students who are not being served by this intervention, or who are the students even being adversely affected by this intervention? And so I think that once again, maybe taking some of the intervention or experiment work and trying to interrogate that critically, I think is what I'll end with that question. So,
Okay.
Thank you so much. I think Tiffany, we're right up on the time. We have a couple more questions in the Q&A, but I'm wondering if people can connect with you maybe online in the future. But I really appreciate you leading us in thinking so closely about, I put this in the chat, but my thinking has been here about not just internally within the methods within our studies, but the kind of work that our studies are doing in the world, right? The effects they're having, our work as an ethical engagement in the world. And then thinking about how we're doing our work within our institutions. You've really prompted me also to think through that and think how we go about doing our work. Like you said, asking our campuses to collect data differently, or all of that. So I really appreciate you taking your time. Really brilliant conversation tonight, and our presentation, and then conversation. Lots in the chat. There's lots on Twitter, and so hopefully you're able to connect in the future. In the chat. Oh, thank you, Carlton, for putting in your Twitter handle. Thank you for doing that. And we will, as we mentioned in the chat somewhere along the way, we do now have a website. We're just about ready to have it go live. And tonight's session, it has been recorded, so you'll be able to check out there. We'll also link the resources that you shared, Dr. Fong. And so we really want to thank you for your time and such a great evening. Thank you.